how food environment might influence satiety. First of all, we need one dimension, and this one dimension is satiety. We could also say it is hunger, but in reverse. So we call it S, or we also could call it hunger. So because this graph is increasing and it's easier with increasing values, we just define hunger as the state of zero satiety and satiety as the state of maximum satiety. Now we need a time unit, which I think ideally now is the given day, because most of calories are for a given day calculated. Of course, you could also calculate them for an hour, but if you then work out for an hour in a day and you do lots of other things and fast in between, then the day seems to be the more rational unit to take a look at. Now, there might be an argument to be made that you should take a look at the calories in a given week, but the problem with this approach might be that for many, this is just a little bit too big, and without tracking calories, it's not something that is very easily accessible. Therefore, let's stick to the day. So the time is the day. So the first thing we need is the one dimension. It is just basically a line. And on this dimension, we just define this as the optimal satiety point. Why this point and not this point? Because we need room for more later on, basically. So we define this point as the point at which optimal satiety is reached. We call this OI. Now, OI is reached not necessarily when all the calorie goals are met, but OI is reached when all the needs for nutrients are met. And this is already one very important distinction, because if we have two kinds of foods, the one is the optimal food and the other one is a less optimal food. Let's say it's 50% less optimal. Then the optimal food would give you the ideal maintenance calories, basically, as a result of all the other things. Because if the body, let's say, needs vitamin A, vitamin D, and these doses, and of course these doses will vary on a given day. In winter, for example, you might need more vitamin D than in summer due to sun and vitamin, or I think it's vitamin A, that is also produced in the skin with the sun. Vitamin D is the one that is made in the skin when it is exposed to sunlight. It makes vitamin D from cholesterol. So with the optimal nutrient intake, it's perfect. You have a certain caloric goal that is basically the result of this. But of course, your nutrition is never ideal, because ideal is a state that cannot really be reached. It can only be approximated. So the other version of this is that you have suboptimal nutrition or less than perfect nutrition. And now here we already have a trade-off to make. Of course, you could say that evolution accounted for this in some kind of way, and therefore has kind of a buffer for not overeating then, as a result maybe of less than optimal nutrients in a diet or in the average diet, which then results in a larger caloric intake. Let's say you do need a certain amount of protein, which you cannot get here, or you could get it here. It's the optimal nutrition, but you cannot get it here at a lower caloric intake. So you need to increase your caloric intake. You basically need to eat more of a food with a given micronutrient density in all of the different dimensions in terms of the different micronutrients. So if we now return to this here, then I think what becomes kind of clear is the result of this. So at the optimal nutrition, the OI satiety level, we would have this level here, which now also extends into the day. And since the day is just one the entire time, we still have a one-dimensional function. So basically we don't need this part here. But now, if we in any kind of fashion deviate from the optimal nutrition, let's say you need 100 grams of protein every single day, but your suboptimal nutrition of 2000 calories only gives you 50 grams, then the only usable function the body has to now increase your caloric intake is to either increase the quality, not to increase the quantity, or to alter the quality of the food. But let's say your average diet is just your average diet and it is fixed, so it cannot increase or it cannot alter the quality of your food in a short time frame at least. Of course, it somehow can, because you can be hungry for certain foods. Maybe you want something salty, maybe you want something that tastes spicy or umami, and this is kind of a way of the body probably to influence the quality of the food. But again, for sake of simplicity, we simplified. We just have these two different nutritions, or these two different average diets. The one is optimal, the other one is less than optimal. And the less than optimal now has 50 grams of protein, but you actually need 100 grams because the muscles combined said to your brain, we need this much protein because otherwise we cannot survive the next workout in 2 days. Given that we worked out in the past for this and this and this and this, our calculations amount for 100 grams of protein. So then, if this is not basically your optimal nutrition, the only response the body has now, again simplified, is to increase the caloric intake. As also explained here already with the bigger circle, it basically increases the point of satiety, because it makes you still hungry. It could also make you hungry for different foods, again, the quality of what you eat, but here we just take a look at the quantity in terms of satiety, or the reverse hunger. We could also call this H minus 1, or whatever you want to call hunger, that is then satisfied. What this now results in is a lot of calories that come with the micronutrients we need. So with the 50 grams of protein, at a suboptimal diet comes maybe an additional 100 grams of carbs, comes maybe 50 grams of additional fat. So therefore, it might be, let's just, for the sake of the argument, say, if we have 50 grams of protein in a 2000 calories a day diet that is less than optimal, but we actually need 100 grams of protein, then the body says, okay, let's eat 4,000 kilocalories of daily intake. And then we have satiety in a given day again. The problem with this approach is that the body now has too much calories. And there are a few different ways the body can get rid of calories by making you move more. So this is called NEAT, which stands for something. Stands for non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which according to ChatGPT in Bing is the energy expended for everything we do that does not include sleeping, eating, or exercise. It works mostly on a subconscious level. You could also consciously increase your exercise, but that would be a conscious decision. Your body probably also makes you produce more heat, which might also be included in NEAT, but I'm not entirely sure. So there are different ways to get rid of the energy. But if it cannot get rid of the energy, then it just might store the energy, because there might be times that are a little bit tougher, and so it might store the energy in fat. And this might mean that you now either have fat cells that are more filled, or the body might also make more fat cells, which are kind of hard to get rid of once they are made. One might now argue eating a suboptimal diet therefore puts you in a devilish circle where you have then more fat cells which you cannot really get rid of, and these fat cells seem to also kind of have a signaling pathway to the brain that makes you eat things that fill up the fat cells again. So they are kind of active, you could say. Also, the fat cells, or the amount of fat that is in you, also depending on where it is stored. So there is the fat that is stored directly under the skin, and there is also fat that is stored in between organs. The fat that is in between organs is called visceral fat. It already sounds very dramatic, and also it kind of is dramatic, not in a very dramatic way, but it is less than optimal to have this. Whereas the subcutaneous fat seems to be a little better in terms of just, if you had to choose one, you would choose the subcutaneous one. As an easy example here, we take a look at my bioimpedance data. So I'm currently at 15.7% body fat, and the visceral fat I have with this amount of body fat can be seen down here, which might be very accurate. It also might not be that accurate. It probably depends somewhat, but it also is probably better than just guessing it entirely. So it says that I have visceral fat of 6. I don't know if this is 6 kilogram or just a level, but I guess it is kilogram, which is borderline acceptable, but it is not good any longer. Visceral fat is a type of body fat that is found around the human organs, which mainly resides in the abdominal cavity. Think people with guts. Now, does this mean you have to eat optimally, absolutely optimally every single time? No, there is this principle called 80-20, that you do things right 80% of the time and 20% of the time, maybe not optimal. It's basically just saying that you should try to approximate, but you don't have to be 100% correct all the time, because obviously instead of 100% being correct with the optimal diet and then fucking it up for 3 days, or effing it up, because I don't want to swear actually in these videos, for a few days and then reversing to the optimal diet is in total, on average, less optimal than just sticking to your diet maybe 80% of the time and having a suboptimal diet 20% of the time. You could also have different ratios, 90-10, 70-30, it depends on what you define as optimal. Now, diet is a very big issue because it's something we all, not because it is something, but there might be several reasons why it is that way. Maybe because it is something that we all kind of have to do. We all have to ingest food into our bodies in order for them to be able to run in the future. So therefore, it is one thing compared to sleeping. It is one thing among with sleeping, among with socializing, among with having a partner and so on, and maybe having a family, that is basically, if there is a subset of activities we have combined, so if these are several interests, so if these are several humans, then there might be an intersection that is basically the intersection between all of these different humans might be these activities. Why? Because that's just kind of the common ground, maybe, due to evolution and so on and so forth. So because it is something that has a lot of interest, and because it is also something everybody tries to solve, there are a lot of different approaches to this. Now, to make it very simple or easy, one could just say the optimal diet is the diet that produces the optimal health. And that's about it. So, of course, you cannot just state, I am super healthy or I am just not super healthy. But you have to have a cycle. And this cycle is maybe analyzing what is there, then trying to, or let's just say the first stage is just seeing or trying to measure what is there, then trying to analyze or interpret, and then trying to improve the whole thing. There are different management cycles which might have several stages, but this is kind of what most stages of what most circles like this are working with. Measure, interpret, improve. So now, of course, not everybody has a lot of measurements available. You cannot get your blood drawn every 2 weeks. Maybe you could potentially if you have the money, but therefore it makes sense to maybe measure in a broader kind of way, maybe by wearing a fitness watch and seeing your resting heart rate, or trying to see trends in your overall activity or in your VO2 max, which seems to predict longevity to a certain extent, or the reverse mortality. The higher your VO2 max, the lower your mortality seems to be. Not necessarily causally linked, but the people who have a higher VO2 max seem to also be the people with a lower mortality, which is not the same. So now, examples for this. Why do we eat sweet things maybe as breakfast? Maybe because we are actually not that hungry in the morning. So therefore, in order to at a given hungry level for actually the optimal diet or nutrition or optimal intake, we therefore need to have a higher food stimulus in order to still be able to eat. So this might be one reason why breakfast foods are sweeter. And the same is true for lots of other things, like you eat something, that's your main meal, that's maybe the optimal diet, and then once you have your natural point of satiety reached with this, you can still increase now satiety level, or the satiety level you could possibly reach, by having now different kind of foods. Maybe it's ice cream, maybe it's chocolate, maybe it's a cake. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that all of these foods combined are basically kind of bypassing the natural satiety mechanism your body has, and therefore they offer a higher satiety level. But this higher satiety level is from a suboptimal diet. So you now have two different scenarios. One scenario is that you eat optimally and then you add the additional calories with ice cream, cake, and junk food, or other foods that have similar properties. And the similar properties are that these things allow basically a satiety level that is above the optimal satiety level. And the second scenario is that you don't eat the good food, the optimal diet at all. But of course, this is the same scenario as eating this, and then just averaging it. So if you get rid of this food entirely, and then you have just on average less and less suboptimal diet, or suboptimal, more suboptimal diet, then again you have a higher level of possible satiety level. A higher possible satiety level, which then again means that you land in the pathway that your body has too many calories, which it can burn as energy. It can make you move a little bit more, but over time, if you just eat an average of these things, or just anything else, if you eat anything else over a long period of time but the optimal diet, then this will result probably in excess calories, which then the body has to get rid of or store in some kind of way, which leads to a suboptimal body composition.